Building a movable pond. Quick intro of the pond. This pond is stacked 2x lumber. It uses log cabin joints. It is 10 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. It has cedar caps on top of the pond walls. The liner is high density polyethylene, works well for this style of pond because the walls come straight up. There are 4 corner bog filters on this. You can see the intake filter there. That's mechanical filtration. It flows up through the bog filter in the corner. It does a U-turn, goes back down, flows up through the media and back out the bottom. So there's one bog filter there. It's pot. There's a second one here. Here you can see where it flows out through the bottom and then back through the planter there. Here's the third one. There's a second one just like that. So that's the pond. It has 5 koi fish, 2 goldfish, and this is going to be a video on how to build this. For this pond, I was worried about the water pressure on the wood, so I built this small scale model, about 1:5, 1:6. It's made out of some approximate 1/4 inch scrap wood I had lying around and some flooring. I did build it, filled it with water. It held water. It did not bow out initially. I used it for about a year for guppies. And yeah, it did eventually bow out and flex out, as did my pond, but I'd already built the pond by the time I figured that out. This pond build requires that all distances between the notches be the same. And to achieve that, cut your boards the same length and use a jig. The jig I used will work for that if they're all the same length. Otherwise, you need a jig that spans the entire length and keeps that distance between those notches the same. Alright, building the jig. Okay, the jig I made is simple. It has 2 lengths of 1/2 inch plywood about 2.5 inches wide and maybe 16 or 20 inches long. These 2 pieces act as the rails which slide down over the edge of the board you want to be cut. Note that this can't be wider than the actual width of your material you're cutting. So for example, if you're using 2x3s and 2x6s, they can't be more than the 2.5 inches wide, which is the dressed width of a 2x3. So building the jig is dead easy. You use a small spacer. You want your rails to be slightly wider than the width of your board. So what I did is I had a spacer and I just used some cuttings off a cereal box, if I remember right, to space it out maybe less than a 1/16 of an inch. So I may have used 2 of those. I can't remember for sure now. Anyway, so it's a little bit wider. With that space in between, clamp these 2 side rails on either side of a piece of 2x something material. Clamp it so that it's right flush with both the top and the very end of your piece of wood. On the very end, you screw a small end piece, again, flush with the top. On the other side, at the very back, over the top of your 2 rails, you run a 90-degree cross piece, and again, screw that down. You're going to probably be banging on this piece of wood, so make sure it's well attached, make sure it's fairly beefy. If you're using plywood, definitely drill out those holes and before you screw it. So pre-drill them so that they don't split the plywood. I would not use plywood. In fact, I used it because I had it around. And finally, you want to set the guide piece for your saw. If you're doing a square, you want to set this 90 degrees. If you're doing an octagonal shape, you put it at 45 degrees. I decided that I wanted a 4-inch flange, minimum 4-inch flange. So then the remaining wood between that notch and the end of the board is 4 inches of material, which is the short edge. So I placed my guide 7 inches from the end. That allows an 1.5 inch guide for my saw. So the blade will be 1.5 inches from that line, from that guide. And then the notch I'm cutting is about 1.5 inches, a little bigger. It'll be maybe 1.5 inches is what I recommend. I went for 1 inch and 7/16 is what I was aiming for when I cut my notches. I find it's a little too tight. So I'd go with 1.5 inches. That leaves you with about 4 inches of material left over. And why 4 inches, you ask? Well, according to me, which really means according to the internet, I went out and that 4 inches is, I think, gives enough sheer strength to that piece so that it doesn't just break off. Okay, with your jig, you can now actually start building your pond. And that consists of making repetitive cuts. When you're cutting this, we are using a skill saw. Pay attention, don't get bored. Make sure The blade is square to the skill saw shoe. Set your skill saw to the correct depth. You want to use 1/4 the depth of the thicker board you're cutting, minus half the gap you want between your boards. Of your 2x6 board, let's say. So I wanted a 1/4 inch gap. I got something bigger, so my math didn't quite work. But anyway, so 1/4 inch of 5.5 inches minus 1/8 of an inch, basically is what I want. So that works out to 1 5/16 of an inch. And you have to adjust that cut for your bottom board, which is going to be a 2x3, I believe. So anyway, set your saw depth. Place your jig. Tap it into place so that your end piece on your jig is up tight against the end of the board and your jig is set flush with the very top of your board. With that, you simply run your saw cut against your guide. Tap the guide forward about 1/4 of an inch. Run your saw again and repeat until your guide is flush with your very first cut. And then run your saw again. Your notch will be 1.5 inches plus the width of your saw blade. So your saw blade's probably 1/8 of an inch thick. That should give you the 1 5/8 cut that I think you want. When I built mine, I actually stopped the guide with about 1/16 of an inch of lip between the first cut and where the guide stopped. If you seal your lumber and if it's all very consistent width, got dressed 2x4s, but they're just for framing. They're not nothing special. So that's what I used. So there is some variance on my boards. All right. Then those notches, take a hammer and a chisel, you just knock those remaining fins off, they'll snap off easy. Then you take your chisel and you just smooth out the bottom. If you're doing an octagonal shape pond like I did, use your jig kitty corner on your board. So you'll cut one side, flip the board over, go to the other end of the board and cut that side. You only do those 2 cuts on all your boards except for your top and bottom pieces where you just do 1 cut on one side. Then once you've done all your boards that way, then you got to take that saw guide and you got to flip it over. So instead of running 45 degrees one way, so you set it 45 degrees the other way. And it's important that you get it in the same location with respect to how far it is from the end of the board. So make sure you get that right. If you're doing a square pond, you don't have to do this. You just do all 4 sides on all your boards. The whole thing about building this is making sure all your cuts are in the same place on every board. So that way it stacks together no matter the order you stack them in. That's how you'd use this jig. I'm not sure what else to say about it. Oh, I will say this in all seriousness. If you're using the method I use, I'm using a skill saw. Make sure whatever is holding your board you're cutting is holding it stable. Clamp it down if you have to. Make sure you clamp that jig we've made onto the board. That way you can use 2 hands on your saw. Make sure you have someone show you how to use that saw if you don't have any experience with it. Putting the pond walls together. You just put your bottom pieces down, your 2x3s, they go across from each other. Every second layer, you just build up layers. It just stacks together. It's easy, easy, easy. It's probably worth putting it together before you paint it. If you find that some cuts are off, if you find they're tight, it could be maybe your saw wasn't running straight up and down. Maybe you just were off when you set the width. It could be anything. It could be cupping in one of your boards. Deal with it now. Probably making the notch wider, possibly machining your wood a bit, getting another piece of wood. Do it now. Make sure it goes together fairly easy. Make sure it's tight, but not so tight that's going to be hard to get back apart. Now, before you put water, you need the liner in. Water is quite heavy, and you might find yourself walking in this pond. So you want bottom protection for your liner. People use geotextile fabric. I personally had some leftover carpet in my basement, and I just cut out pieces and put those under there, and put the liner on top of that. You also want side protection where the wood is. I used 1.5 inch rigid insulation, which I'll talk to in a bit. Installing the liner. The liner I'm installing is high density polyethylene. It is nice and light. That is one benefit to doing this liner. It makes it quite easy. Although it is cold out when I do it, so it's not as easy as it could be. Keep in mind what you're seeing here is my first attempt at trying to do this, so it's not exactly smoothly going. Anyway, my First thing I do is I fold the liner so that the bottom will fit in the pond where it's expected to go. That is, I fold up the sides and then lay it out in the pond and then unfold the sides onto the side of the pond. At least that was the plan. Make sure your liner is nice and clean. You don't want any grit and stuff on there that might get trapped under the liner and then be a pressure point. So I did sweep it off before doing this. Put the liner in the pond, then you pull the sides up. I'm doing this alone, so you want clamps. You clamps to hold the edges in place as you roughly place the liner, you smooth it out, and then fold in the corners. At this point, the key thing is to ensure the liner is centered. In my case, the liner is cut very close to the size of the pond. This was just coincidence. I bought a piece of liner, I cut it in half, and it basically exactly fit the sides. I had no room to have it even a couple inches off center lengthwise. So it's important for me. It's important in general. I did get it roughly smoothed out, as I mentioned. Then I added some water in the bottom, maybe 15 or 20 gallons worth, just enough to get maybe half an inch of water on the bottom. That just weighs it down and lets you smooth it out and hold its position, hold its shape a little better. Folding the corners, one good tip on this I got from the internet was to fold it so that the seams run vertical right in the corner. That is to say, the diagonal fold should go behind the visible side of the liner. It go between, so in towards the boards, and then the corner goes straight up. At this point, get it as smooth as you can. The excess liner sticking up can be back folded in behind itself so that it goes back behind the liner and the wall. I recommend this if you have extra so you're not cutting it, and just in case you don't have it centered. In my case, I did this in the corners. The longer edges I cut close to top so that it just went up to the top and just over and down about an inch on the other side. That way, when I put the top caps on, it would pinch it down and hold it in place. Take your time at this point, get it as smooth as possible. Once you put the water in, it is really, really hard to move this liner. You might be able to smooth out the sides a bit, but you're not going to be able to smooth it off the bottom. It is just way too heavy. It is very important that the top edge of the liner does not have any folds or corners that go downward. Even the folds behind, if they go down below the water line, the water's got to flow out. I know that's a statement to the obvious, but do be aware. If that fold is going dangling down, you have to readjust the fold. You have to readjust the liner so that that is going straight across horizontally. No point of that fold, either the point towards the water or the point in behind, can be below the water line. Yeah, I know that's a statement of the obvious, but you got to do that now and fix that now before you put the water in. I've used the top caps to hold this liner in place. I also taped it down in spots with some duct tape to hold it there. It's important that it doesn't slip loose and then fall back into the water, because then as soon as the water starts flowing out, it's just going to go lower, lower. It will drain your entire pond. Yeah, when it comes to moving the pond, okay, the key thing is you need a second liner. Well, this particular pond, when you move it, you partially take it apart, you partially build it up in your second area, you put the liner in, and then you start moving water, and then you take off the next layer, move that over, move some more water. That's how you move this pond. So you need two liners. So keep that in mind if you're building this style of pond and you want to be able to move it. And it's worth noting that centering the liner when you're doing this is harder to do because you don't have the full wall. So it's good to have the center edges of the liner marked somehow. I have some tape on mine. I was worried about a leak, so I ran some flex tape. I believe it's called the Gorilla Glue version. And just ran that right down the center line, center crease actually. I had a crease in the center, and that marks my center point. So I know where to have that on the center of my wall. Just got lucky that way, and it works really well. That's about it, really. I'm not sure what to add more about this liner. I will say here, I've said it elsewhere, that I've used HDPE. It's nice and light. It's easy to move around. It's easy for one person to do. However, most people on the internet, they will tell you to use a thicker rubber-like liner, EPDM. I believe it's is called. I don't know what it's named for. So maybe look into that. And I've never worked with it, so I can't give any advice on that. That's about it about the liner. Building the top rim and the seats slash ledges I put the filters on. So I chose to build this out of 2x dimensional lumber, cedar in this case, which I varnished. Because these are butting against each other on top, the angle you need for an octagonal shape is 22.5 degrees. So when they butt up, they form a nice 45-degree angle. The side tops running just along the top, a 2x6 cedar board, a single row. On the outside edge, I have a 2x2 cleat, if you like, running the full length, again screwed up from the bottom. The inside, I have, depending on the length, I have some 10-ish inch cleats on the inside. I had centered them and I'd used a 2x4 to place them along with probably 1/8 of an inch worth of extra thickness added. So that's centered and running lengthways. And again, that just pushes down on top of the pond wall and the liner folds over, it pinches the liner down and holds the liner from falling into the pond. As I mentioned, critical. If your liner starts falling inwards, goes under the water line, the water flows out and it empties your pond. So you really don't want to do that. You may in fact want to ensure the liner is more securely secured than just pitching it in place with its top edges. Especially if you have young kids or something that might knock those boards off, maybe a big dog or something like that, big winds, whatever. Maybe you want to tape that liner down or even screw it on or some such before you put your top cap on. And again, hard to describe. Hopefully the pictures and video make it clear what the heck I'm talking about. Building the corner seat. My corner seats consist of 2 boards side by side with about the same gap on those as I have between my boards, so about 1/2 inch. I might have actually spread that out further so that my plant pot filters fit on it better. What I ended up doing is on the inside edge, I clamped another little piece to give it a little extra space on the shelf so that the pot could sit on that. You'll see in the picture. These I placed on the top edge of the pond. Then I used 2 boards running on the outside edge of the pond wall. So 2 boards. I marked those, flipped the whole thing over, and then screwed from the bottom up so that you don't see screw heads on top, you don't collect water, etc. Screw from the bottom up. That will then hold the seat on top of the pond and not allow it to move forward into the pond. And then I took another piece and I put it parallel to the edge of the pond on the inside of the pond. So again, screw that up through the bottom. This I did not put in super tight. I had my liner in place and I put it in there so that it was putting pressure against the liner. So the idea is that this board actually pushes the liner back against the wall and prevents it from falling downwards into the pond, which is critical. You do not want that liner falling down into the pond. In fact, if I remember right, I believe I taped it over the top edge of the pond before I put this corner ledge onto the pond.